Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go through a new deck from set 13, and that is Drajeweled Ignis. This deck is one of the best decks in the format, along with Youthberg Full Blast as well as Leonel Vivace. This card, well, this deck in its entirety is pretty much maximized so that it uses very minimal resources to get essentially what you want, and a very aggressive deck once it gets to the turn 4 when you ride Drajeweled Ignis. If you guys need any coaching, my updated link for Metafy is in the bottom right hand corner and in the description. Feel free to book a session and we can get started. If you guys haven't done it already, click that subscribe button for all notifications on new videos that come on this channel. Drajeweled Ignis, probably one of the sickest cards to ever be released in standard, and the Drajeweled package entirely is really sick. One of the coolest decks, I gotta say, in the standard format. I've had a lot of enjoyment playing Drajeweled Mask, and this deck is no different. I think this deck is pretty ridiculous with the power scaling that set 13 kind of gives to the format. Alright, so just looking at the ride line, so we played the Drajeweled line with the set 7 Drajeweled. So starting with the starter's starter, you played Dual Core Dragon, so pretty much when it was rode upon by the grade 2, then you call it out to rearguard. You essentially have an extra attacker, and after it attacks, then you put it back into soul. The grade 2, when it hits a Vanguard, then you soul charge 1, so if you put Dual Core at the back, then it hits for 23 on grade 2. Really strong. And then if it's rode upon by Drajeweled, then you soul charge 1. If you have 3 or more cards with different grades, then you draw 1. Okay? Obviously looking at the Drajeweled grade 3, so because we don't run any other Drajeweled grade 3s or the mask, you only ever get this effect off once, so you can counterblast 1, soul charge 2. If you have, if all the cards that you soul charge are different grades, then you can draw 1. Additionally, when you attack a Vanguard, you can soul blast 4 different grades, choose one of your opponent's Vanguard and decrease it to 1, or increase or decrease it to 1. And then if your opponent's grade 3, then it gains a crit. But if you're going first, this card is really impactful because it essentially gives a 10k buff to the front row in retrospect. So yeah, with restanders, it's really strong. Okay. Other stuff that we run, so obviously the starter of the deck, which is Drajeweled Ignis, one of the probably sickest cards to ever be revealed. When I saw this card, I was screaming. This card can only be ridden from a unit with Drajeweled, so it has the, mask clause, so you can only ride on top of grade 3, and then the second skill is at the beginning of your battle phase, you can choose 2 cards from your drop and put it into soul, and then if your soul has 4 or more different grades, then your front row gains plus 15. That is the first ability that you want to proc, right? Set up, get a plus 15, and there is no restriction on the plus 15. So if you're going first, your opponent hasn't persona road yet, you pretty much ride this and absolutely obliterate your opponent. Okay. Then the last ability is while you're paying the cost of this ability, you may soul blast Drajeweled cards, and they count as any grades from 0 to 4. This is really important because the grade 3 in your ride line counts as any grade that you're missing, right? This is very important because if for some reason you can't soul charge enough, then you always want to keep that Drajeweled active so that it becomes essentially like a wild card. It can be placed in place of any other grade, right? When this unit attacks, you can soul blast 5 different grades, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so 5 different grades. Retire all of your opponent's back row rear guards, and until the end of turn, this unit gets crit, and increase and decrease all of your opponent's front row units to 0. 0 is a very important number in comparison to 1, right? 0 means that the front row technically gains plus 15k power. If it's 1, it's only 10k because you essentially get a 1k buff, right? In its entirety, right? So if you think about it that way, then your opponent stays on 1k, yeah? But yeah, it gives essentially the front row plus 15, yeah? On top of the 15 that you get off this, and the best thing about this card is triple drive. Triple drive is ridiculous with this card, right? If you hit double front, it's actually over. Like your opponent just can't guard 50Ks across the board, right? It's PG or bust. right? You hit a crit, you stack on something, PG or bust, yeah? This card is very strong. Also, another card that got introduced in the set is Nocturcio. This is a really strong card, actually inside and outside of this deck, but in the retrospect of this deck, it is very, very good. So when it's placed on Rearguard or Vanguard, Rearguard or Guardian Circle, choose up to one grade 4 card from hand and reveal it. If you revealed a card, or if your Vanguard is grade 4, then perform the abilities according to where this card is, right? If it's placed on Rearguard, +1, draw a card, choose 2 cards from the drop and put it into Soul. Very strong card, very good utility card to kind of set up your Soul to ensure that you get, you know, enough cards in Soul to fulfill for Drajeweled Ignis' condition. If it's placed on Guardian Circle, it gains +15 shield. This is a really good grade 3 in Drajeweled Ignis because pretty much you draw this as a 15k shield without you needing to play anything. Because the requirement, the fact that you're on grade 4 is always going to be there, right? Well, other than the first 3 turns, right? And then if it's discarded from hand while riding a grade 3 from the ride deck or paying cost of stride, then you draw 1. So you can actually discard this card, get the card that you discarded back by drawing 1, and then you ride into a grade 3 for your ride line. Very strong card, a much welcome addition to this particular deck. Next, we actually play one of the Ristal Gala, and this is actually just because we run Formidol, right? In the instances where we don't really want to find Drajeweled Ignis, then we want to find 2 different grade 3s, then we find a Ristal Gala and the Nocturcio, then that way, you know, 2 front row attackers, and yeah, that's just how it is, right? This is really useful, especially if you have a Drajeweled Ignis in hand already, and you have a Formidol. You want to kind of thin your deck so that, you know, Drajewel starts hitting triggers. That's kind of what you want. I guess the effect of this card, it's when it attacks a Vanguard, if you have Soul Blasted 4 or more, for the cost of your Vanguard's ability this turn, you can put a card from your hand into Soul, draw 1, and choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. Spot retire, much welcome addition. But yeah, nothing too super crazy about this card. A really good card to kind of just, you know, thin out your deck while you're kind of churning through all the other stuff as well. This next card though is busted. Zaga. This card is crazy. When this dropped for Drajeweled, I was like, there is no way you just gave me this card, right? Essentially, it is a on-place rearguard during main phase, Soul Charge 1, choose up to 1 grade 4 in hand and reveal it. If you revealed, or if you have a grade 4 Vanguard, you choose a card from your Soul that is not named this card, that is equal or less to the Vanguard at the moment, or the grade of your Vanguard, and you call out to rearguard. So TLDR is, if you're on Drajeweled Ignis, you play this, you Soul Charge 1, you call a card from your Soul that is not him, right? Busted card. Why is this busted is because if decks start retiring your Rockagore, then you can call it out from Soul after putting it into Soul, off like Drajeweled Ignis on the previous turn, off your Nocturcio. You have multiple ways of getting that Rockagore into Soul, so you don't really care about Rockagore dying. And just talking about Rockagore, probably the best re-standard card in this deck has been since, I guess, Drajeweled dropped. When this unit attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, if your Soul has 4 or more cards with different grades, then it gains +10 until end of turn. And then when you Soul Blast 4 or more cards at the same time for the cost of your Vanguard's ability, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3, you can counter some restand. The good thing about this deck is that it actually uses very little counterblast, and that is a welcome addition, right? The only counterblast that it kind of uses is Rockagore, sometimes Nocturcio if your Soul is not great. And then your Horde/Draco Kid. So I guess I'll explain Horde/Draco Kid, well, the Draco Kid. So Camel's 1 top 7 for a grade 4 Drajeweled, and if you don't find it in the top 7, then as long as you're on grade 4 Drajeweled, or if you have a Ignis in hand, then you draw 1, right? So if you're on a grade 4, if you Camel's 1 and you miss, then you just draw 1. Really good card because it creates a body on the board and it refunds the card that I guess it calls, well, it is used to call this card onto the board, right? So yeah, +1, always good. And then the last card, this card is also insane, Varpula. So this card replaces Empusa, which used to be in the Drajeweled Math deck. Why is this so good? It's because it essentially says you can restand any rearguard. Yeah, that's just how it is, right? When you Soul Blast 4 or more cards at the same time for the cost of your Vanguard's ability, you can put this into Soul and draw a card. So just there, that replaces itself by committing the card onto the board. It also gives +1 Soul, right? So you don't really need to care about the grade 1 on the following turn, right? If you revealed a card, or if you have a grade 4 card, well, Vanguard with Drajeweled, then choose one of your rear guards, and if your rear guards did not restand by a card's ability this turn, you can restand it. So you want to proc this before Rockagore, because then that means it's a 5 attack deck, and yeah, if you're resetting your opponent's Vanguard power to 0, like that's ridiculous, right? So Varpula, very, very good. The fact that now you have Zagan to, I guess, recycle and just keep recalling Varpula, you will always have 5 attacks. No matter what. So you kind of have to play a bit, you kind of have to chip and change with Varpula and Rockagore, just to make sure that you have one or the other in hand on any given turn, and then that way you have a follow-up for the next turn, and then Zagan the next card. So if you think about Zagan, Zagan is pretty much another copy of Varpula or another copy of Rockagore at any given point, right? So yeah, that is pretty much the main stuff. You play 4 grade 1 PGs, and this is really important because if you need to call a body, then it's good, right? Because this deck, it needs bodies on the board, but also, well, I guess it doesn't really matter in terms of like the unit effects, but yeah, just the fact that it is a body on the board is really good, because 10 plus 6 is 16, right? And that's a magic number against a 1. 1 is equivalent to 1k, right? That means your opponent has to guard for 20k. So playing 4 grade 1 PGs, 4 callable units is really, really good in this deck, right? Let's just say, you know, later on, you know, you get to a later stage where you actually need to call a 6k. 6 plus 10 is still 16. Your opponent still has to guard 20 on a 0. Like 11, I guess 11 and 6 doesn't really matter, but yeah, it's the 10 and 6 which is really, really impactful. But yeah, I guess if you find that, you know, you don't really need the grade 1 PG, then you can play 3 and 1 Sanctitude. But yeah, I don't think I've ever found the need to play the Sanctitude, similarly to kind of how Greedon operates. So in terms of the triggers, so we play 4 different triggers. So we play heal, draw, crit, front, all effect triggers, except for the heal. You can play effect heals if you like. I think with this deck, you want to play 15k heals because of the early game aggression. If your opponent aggroes you, then you want a way to kind of guard. You can't solely rely on crits as well. Front in this deck is really, really strong. Pretty much you just like plus 10k to front row and your opponent just can't do anything about it, especially if they have 0 power. Crits are crits, crits is always good, but the fact that this goes into Soul means that you fulfill the requirement sometimes, because if you don't have a grade 0 in Soul for some odd reason, this can be put into Soul to meet the Drajeweled Ignis requirement. 10k draws is always good. Draws is good because you start drawing into your Ignis, your Zargans, your Varpula, and pretty much all the stuff that you need, your Rockagores. You kind of need to churn through your deck. Blue OT is really good in this deck. You don't need the Dark States OT because it's not a Vanguard centric deck, as well as your Vanguard doesn't restand. The Blue OT is really good because you can salvage, you know, your Varpulas, your Zargans, Ignis for some odd reason, your Rockagores. You pretty much get any card that is available to you at any given point in the game. So yeah, very good. And 1 Forbidol, as I explained before, Forbidol is really good in this deck because it's a 5th copy of Drajeweled Ignis. So if you draw this, you activate it on grade 3, you get a Drajeweled Ignis in hand without needing to use the Draco Kid skill to kind of gacha your way the top 7 and hopefully you get an Ignis or something like that. You assure, get yourself a grade 4, and that's pretty much how it is, right? Now, some alternatives. So you can actually cut some of this stuff. So you can cut the Ristal Gala if you find that, you know, Forbidol finding Ristal Gala is like not great. So you can cut the Ristal Gala, you can probably cut maybe one of the Draco Kid or maybe one of the Nocturcio. Other cards you can put in is more Drajeweled grade 3, so if you start soul charging them, they become wild cards. If you would like, let's just say you don't find your Drajeweled Ignis and you want a Persona Ride, then at least then you can have multiple Drajeweled to kind of rewrite into. But I mean, if you're missing Drajeweled Ignis, it's like pretty bad, right? You might as well run more searches to try to find your Drajeweled Ignis, more cards to kind of dig. But yeah, those are kind of like the cuttable cards. So one Nocturcio, the Ristal Gala, the one Draco Kid maybe. But I think 4 Draco Kid is just so good for consistency of a Drajeweled Ignis oriented deck, right? I don't find that you will find yourself going into like Drajeweled Mask in this deck, because I think both of the decks are their own separate decks. I think Drajeweled Ignis is just really strong and really good. And yeah, that's pretty much like kind of all the changes. You can kind of chip and change on the triggers as well. I highly recommend playing 4 fronts. 4 fronts is just ridiculous in this deck. Other things you can cut, you can probably cut the draws for crits if you like, if you find that you're drawing a bunch. But this deck actually doesn't draw too much. Maybe you just like farm up with like triple drives over a couple turns. But I think the aggro on this deck is just really good. And you just need to kill them in a short span of time. So yeah, that's pretty much how the deck is kind of built. And like I said before, you can change the PGs into 3 and 1, so 1 Sanctitude if you like, but keeping 4 is completely fine as well. If you find that you are on a budget and you can't play the Cray Elemental, well, the blue OT, you can look to play the Dark States OT. You can also play the 200 million OT. 200 million OT is actually pretty good in this deck, because you restand the 2 front row, you give them 100 million each, and your opponent actually can't do anything about it. The best thing about this deck is that it imitates having OT level power on a rearguard, because it's practically unguardable in terms of power, right? If you're stuck on 0, try guarding a 50k rearguard. It's actually impossible, right? PG or bust. Like, that's like 4 15k shields. You only get like what, 12 15ks maybe if you're lucky. If you're playing a deck that plays front and crits and no draws, then sure, you get like 16 15ks and maybe an OT, maybe a PG. But if you're raw guarding that, that's really tough. So yeah, kind of shows how impactful OT would be in this deck if you place 100 million on 2 sides. So yeah, that is another budget option as well. So just jumping up to CFA, kind of showing you how the deck operates. This deck needs a little bit of micromanagement with the soul, with your drop zone as well. And you kind of have to look forward a turn. What I mean by that is you need to kind of prepare for a turn ahead. Let's just say your Rockable just dies, your Varpulas are like all used, you have like a bunch of Zargons, you kind of have to juggle that, right? So yeah, let's go through the deck anyway. So we're just going to shuffle up, just kind of talk about the mulligans. This hand is really good. So you want to keep the Forbidol, because the Forbidol is your access to Drajeweled Ignis. If you find Drajeweled Ignis later on, then you just kind of ditch it for ride line, because you only ever ride into Drajeweled Ignis once, because it doesn't have Persona Ride, right? PG can kind of go back. Nocturcio is not too relevant until you get to grade 3, so maybe you want to keep it to draw 1. Zargon is not good in the early game because you actually don't have soul, and it's only kind of live when you get to grade 4, so you actually put back the Zargon. One thing I didn't explain is that Zargon actually gets boost as well, so you can actually put it as a 10k booster behind any of your sides. Very strong card. So put the Zargon back and then draw 2. So that's kind of like where we want it to be, right? A lot of these cards are like waiting for certain things to kind of be live. The good thing about Varpula is that it actually works on grade 3 as well, as long as you have a Drajeweled Ignis in hand, so you actually get 5 attacks on the grade 3 turn as well. Alright, so shuffle up, draw 1. Double Varpula is kind of okay. We'll end up drawing into a Zargon later. The draw in the early game doesn't matter either. So because, let's just say we're going first, we'll dish the draw because it's just a 5k equivalent to a Varpula. So you rather dual core, cool, and then end turn, Let's take a damage. We damage the Zargon. Not something that we want now. We kind of want to keep it in deck, but that's okay. Stand and draw, Rockagore. So we have 2 Rockagores already and 2 Varpulas. So like I said before, you kind of have to chip and change and juggle this so that you don't conflict with each other. If you're restanding with 1 Varpula, then you kind of want to keep the Rockagore in hand, and then if you're restanding with Rockagore and don't have Varpula, then you want a Zargon in hand, right? Obviously we don't have that, so Varpula is just more flexible. So we'll ditch the Rockagore, we ride this Dual Core calls itself. So let's just say we want to rush, we can place it in the front row, and then that will hit for 13, and then the 10 to the middle column as well. Let's just say, we attack for 13, cool, and then at the end of battle it goes back into Soul, and then 10 again, attack Drajeweled Ignis. That's pretty good. The only problem now is that the Forbidol would probably find a Nocturcio, which is fine, right? Because Nocturcio can then put the Rockagore in Soul as we lead up to the grade 3, okay? So we don't really have much to guard, so we take 1. Draw Trigger's pretty good. That blocks 1 of the rearguard attacks, and then let's just say they don't get anything, right? They don't get a trigger, they don't break the 20k. Alright, stand and draw. So now we ditch the Nocturcio and ride the grade 3. Nocturcio procs, and the Junial procs as well. So this is where you kind of have to manage what you soul charge and which effects to activate first, right? So you've seen a lot of non-3s, but you've barely seen triggers, so the likelihood of this soul charging 2 triggers is actually pretty high. Nocturcio will draw you 1, so it might be better to draw 1 to maybe draw a trigger, and then soul charge 2 to draw 1. Right, so let's do that. Nocturcio draw 1, so we did draw a trigger like I said, and then the Junial will then soul charge 1. So, oh wait, no, this will soul charge 1, but we already have 3 in soul. My bad. So soul charge 1, we already have 3 different grades, so we draw 1. Okay. This hand is a little bit weird, but that's okay, right? So we can callous 1, soul charge 2. So the 2 cards we soul charge a heal and a grade 1 because they're different grades. We draw 1, much welcomed. And then we can Forbidol here as well. The problem is that I guess you don't restand with Rockagore. I mean, you can't restand anyways because it's locked behind a grade 3. So I guess we can Forbidol. Forbidol then searches for your Ristal Gala and your Nocturcio. Pretty good. Nocturcio is pretty good here because then you can Camelos 1 and then shove 2 cards into Soul. Nocturcio will allow you to draw 1. So your hand is actually pretty beefy now. So the 2 cards that you kind of want to put into is Rockagore and maybe Nocturcio. So this is where kind of the soul management comes into play, right? So you kind of want to count in blocks of 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So we have a 0, 1, 2, we don't have a 3, and we don't have a 4. But the Drajeweled from when we ride into Ignis next turn counts as a 4, right? So we need a 3, and we also need a 2. So 3 and 2, perfect. So we got the Nocturcio and the Rockagore. Cool. So now this card is actually vanilla, so it doesn't really work well in this formation. So what we want to do would put that to the bottom here. Oh, actually, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you just want to make numbers, and yeah. So we can play double Varpula. Varpula will only work once on this turn by showing the grade 4, but as long as you restand it once, then we're all good, right? So we want to restand the Ristal Gala, because then we get 2 spot retires. Or you filter cards from hand into soul, then you meet the requirements for Drajeweled Ignis afterwards. Okay, so the last card you actually want to restand is this with the booster. So you want to go 13, 21, then 13 resets to 1 power, and then restand the Ristal Gala. Okay, so in terms of the formation, so then you go Ristal Gala first. Obviously we don't activate the skill because we haven't Soul Blasted 4 or more yet, and this is 21, right? Then we attack with Drajeweled, and then we can Soul Blast 4 cards with different grades, and then decrease the power to 1, right? So here we again count in blocks of 5 because we want to prepare for Drajeweled Ignis. We do have 2 1s here. Dual Core is alright, so we can ditch like 0, 1, 2, and then Nocturcio. So that's 4 different cards. Reduce your opponent's power to 1, and then because Varpula's skill activates, you can put it into Soul and draw 1. Then you show a grade 4, and then you restand the Ristal Gala, right? Twin Drive, you check 1. Front is really strong here. Because you're going first, your opponent is now on 1 power, and they have to guard a 31k, which is 35k shield. Disgusting. Second check, Drajeweled Ignis, that's good. Now the good thing is that Drajeweled Ignis can actually go into Soul as a wild card because we now have 2 in hand. So here you attack, Ristal Gala skill, you put a card from my hand into Soul and I draw 1. I put the Drajeweled Ignis into Soul and draw 1, and then you spot retire, okay? Get to your opponent's turn, let's just say, you know, they start attacking you, so let's just say you go 15, take 1, draw trigger is pretty good, draw 1. Let's just say, you know, take another, OT is pretty good, give OT here, your opponent kills your 2 rear guards, okay? Cool, stand and draw, and then we ride into Drajeweled Ignis. This is where the fun begins, right? When you ride on top, then obviously you need to make sure that you're always counting in blocks of 5. So we have a 0, 1, 2. We don't have we do have a 3 and a 4, but we want to keep the Drajeweleds as wild cards. So if there is an opportunity for you to, I guess, Soul Charge a 3, then you should do it, right? But it's okay. I mean, we do have access to a Rockagore. No, we do. Yeah, we do have access to a Rockagore. And I guess we have 1, 2, well, a 0, 1, 2, 3. So based on what we Soul Charge off the Zargan, then we can, I guess, call accordingly, right? We can also call the Draco Kid. The Draco Kid will allow us to draw 1, but we want to keep the CB to restand with the Rockagore. So let's call the Zargan here. Okay, the Zargan counts as a booster, yeah? So Zargan skill, you Soul Charge 1, because we have a grade 4 Vanguard, then we just call whatever you want from Soul. Varpula is good because it actually just draws you 1 for free. I guess we can just call that and then call like Zargan into the front row. This is like plus 15, so it's a 28 solo attacker. So we can pull the Varpula there. We don't really want to call anything else because, you know, Rockagore is pretty good. It's a protected card. I guess then you can kind of keep the Zargan there as well. But I think Varpula, the fact that you just draw is really, really strong. Okay, and then we play the Rockagore there. We do have 4 or more different grades in Soul, but just be careful here. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because you need to make sure that you also have 4 different grades after you Soul Blast as well. Okay, so you have 7 plus 2 is 9, and so you need to make sure that the remaining cards are 4 different grades. Okay, so in terms of attack pattern, so I guess at the beginning of your battle phase, you choose 2 cards from your drop in, put into Soul. If you have 4 different grades, which we do already, gains plus 15k. So we're just going to give 15k to the front row. So now we have to count in blocks of 5. So 0, 1, 2, we don't have a 3, and we don't have a, well, we do have a 4, right? So we need a 3, and then the second block, we don't have a 0, we have a 1, and we don't have a 2. So we want to put a 0, 2, or 3 into Soul, because we have 2 1s already. So 0, 2, or 3. So let's put Nocturcio as a 3, and then a Junior as a 2, right? Cool. and then that makes 9. So when you Soul Blast, so you Soul Blast the 0, 1, the 2, the 3, and then the 4, and then the remaining cards will be 1, 3, and then the 4, right? Am I counting wrong? 0. So we need a 0 actually. So we actually don't want a 2. No, we have a 3. So the cards that we Soul Blast will be 0, 1. The Jewel is 2. Nocturcio is 3. And then the Ignis is 4. So we have a 1, 2, 3. So we're actually missing 1, right? So we actually might want to use the 3, this 3 here as something else. So which is where this is like a little bit tricky, because what you can do is then you can shove the 0 into Soul to make sure that Rockagore gains +10. But sometimes, you know, you kind of have to give it up, right? But yeah, I think this is pretty okay. I guess we can put the, either way, we have too many 1s in Soul, I think. So what you can do, you can put the Vipula there and then put the grade 0 here. And then that way it fulfills the requirements for Rockagore, right? So you have to always count in blocks of 5 and just make sure that you have 4 different grades to ensure that Rockagore is live. Yep. So let's just say we attack with this first. That's, yeah. And then you put this into Soul. The 2k actually matters because this is 33. If you give 2k here, this becomes 35. And if your opponent goes to 0, it's a 40k shield, right? Then 27, sorry, 35. And then this will Soul Blast 5. So we obviously Soul Blast the 5. And then your opponent retires the whole back row. This gains 1 crit. Yeah, and then this boosts. Vipula goes into Soul and then draws 1. And then it restands this. Rockagore, count +1, restands, right? The 2k only really matters if you have a booster, I guess. So if you use like the Vipula here, then that would have been 35 on a 0. But yeah, ignore me, the 2k doesn't actually matter. So actually the 2k is better suited for the Vanguard because it's, well, actually it doesn't matter. The 2k that actually doesn't matter. Irrelevant 2k, but yeah, the 2k is good if you have like the Vipula, right? So you triple drive, first check front, that is disgusting. 2 crit, also disgusting. And then 3, yeah. 35 on a 0, 40k shield. 47 on a 0, that is 50k shield. And you can see how this deck, right, is pretty much OT numbers on rear guard, right? 50k shield is 4 card guard. 15, 15, 15, and a 5, which is ridiculous. Some decks don't even run front triggers, right? Which makes this deck actually very, very aggressive once it gets to grade 4. You'd be pretty lucky to live through 2 grade 4 turns, like, without being able to like farm up. If you don't stay low enough, like, this deck just reels you, and there's actually nothing you can do about it. So yeah, that is pretty much Drajeweled Ignis. A little bit confusing in terms of like kind of how to simulate the deck, because there's a lot of moving parts. You just kind of have to pre-plan stuff and make sure you're counting in blocks of 5. And if you're counting in blocks of 5, then you know you're always going to get Drajeweled Ignis and live, I guess, and always use your Nocturcio. Don't always, I guess overcommit on guarding, because you need the counterblast to kind of work through your soul, and don't be afraid to kind of use your crit triggers to put into soul to ensure that you have the correct numbers in soul as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys like this video, pop a like, comment down below what you guys think of this deck, how this deck goes in the metagame. Have you guys played it in the JP format? Let everyone know kind of how this deck, and any tips and tricks that you kind of want to share to the community here. Very, very welcome for those. If you guys haven't already, click that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.